stealing the truth. I awaken, as I have for as long as I can remember, to the sound of my father's voice. You're lying in the filth! You're lying in the filth! You're lying in the filth! Reflexively, I put my thumb further back in my mouth, and I grabbed the pink blanket with the frayed satin edging, the one that smells so wonderfully of me and of nothing but me, and I shove it under my nose. I don't have to open my eyes to know that he's standing over my brother's bed, that his eyes have become slits, his hands are bulged into fists, and you can see ropey veins standing out along his forearms. Are you going to just lie there, he says. Are you going to just lie there? Are you going to just lie there? This time he's really going to do what I think. This time he's really going to do what he's really going to kill him. But as always, my father reaches over and yanks off the blankets and the sheets my brother has pulled over his head. And then like a magician performing a parlor trick, pulling out a tablecloth and leaving the setting intact, he yanks off the urine-sodden undersheet, leaving my brother huddled on the yellowing piece of plastic that is supposed to protect the mattress. Take them off, he says. Take them off! Take them off right now! My brother neither moves nor says a word. My father reaches up, puts his hands around his waist, grabs the elastic of his pajama bottoms, and yanks them off. Rolls them onto the ball, grabs up the wet sheet, and leaves the room. I am telling this story in the dark, cool cave of my therapist's office. And when I've finished, I realize that my left ear has become very, very hot. I don't have to look in the mirror to know it has also turned bright red. You see, Dolores, I said, do you see this? She nods her head. This has been happening to me on and off for the last 10 years, and I don't know why. And the moment I say that, I know why. Oh, this is the ear that heard all this. This is the ear that, when I was in my childhood sleeping position on my right side, this is the ear that could hear. What happens next, she says. I don't know. And to try to get some sense of it, I lie down on her soft leather couch in my child's sleeping position on my right side, and as soon as I do, my left hand claps itself over my left ear. And the scene goes dark. I can no longer see the little red and white sailboats scudding across the blue linoleum floor. I can't see the tall wardrobes with my mother's clothes in them, with her hat boxes piled on top. All I can see is a little orange rectangle of New York City sky out the window above the neighboring buildings. It's gotten very dark, I say. It's suddenly turned to night. I can't see anything. Put your hand down and tell me what you hear, Julie, she says. I can't. I can't. I can't move it. Listen through your hand and tell me what you hear. And so I listen. And I hear a door opening and slippered feet moving across the linoleum floor. And then I hear the springs of my brother's bed groan as a weight settles on him. And then I hear another groaning, slow and rhythmic. And then in a high, matching rhythm. Of course, my brother's bedwetting does not go on forever. My mother finally announces she has had enough, she can't stand it anymore, although she never appears in these scenes. She must hear everything from the bedroom next door. She decides, over my father's violent objections, to send my brother to a world-renowned child psychologist, Grace Marie Graham. The woman really hated mothers, my mother complains to me decades later. She didn't even have a waiting room. I had to walk the streets of New York for an hour until your brother was finished with his session. But Mrs. Graham succeeds. In 2 years, she discovers that my brother is angry at my mother. And why is he angry at my mother? He's angry because my mother makes him take his lunch to school instead of letting him come home like the other kids. My mother is informed of this. She allows my brother to come home from school. and the bedwetting stops. But I come to realize that something else happens about just the same time. The next week I go back to see Dolores again and I say, I want to work on that scene with my brother and my father. I want to see what more I can remember. She says, fine. And so once more I lie down on the comfortable leather couch, and this time my arm does not go up to cover my left ear. I lie down, but the moment I lie down again, it's my darkened bedroom that I share with my brother. I lie down and listen. And once more I hear the door open, and I hear the feet moving across the floor, but no sound comes from my brother's bed. Instead, I feel a presence looming over me, and I begin to get goosebumps. I pull my knees up to my chest, and I push myself as hard as I can into the mattress. A pair of hands grabs me by the ankles and straightens out my legs, turns me over, pulls up my nightgown, and rubs something very cold and greasy between my buttocks and around my anus. And then I feel a weight on my back, rubbing itself against me. And then I feel something that has been soft against my back becoming hard, and then inch by excruciating inch, my father inserts himself inside. My left foot, the one that I seem to keep spraining, starts to go like that, as if it was going to kick the pain out of me. And then all of a sudden, the muscles at the bottom of my spine tighten, and the muscles at the top of my neck tighten, and I don't feel anything else. I awaken the next morning and remember nothing. But miracles of miracles, my brother's bed is dry. And my father seems to intuit this. He doesn't even come in to check. I get up, I put on the clothes my mother has laid out for me. I walk into the bedroom where my father performs his school day ritual of braiding my hair so tight that I feel it's going to bleed at the roots. And I leave for school with my brother. As soon as we get out the apartment building door, he runs off up the block so I can't see him, although he's supposed to be taking me to school. But I'm a big girl, I am 6 years old, and I know the way. So I walk to school, keeping my eyes on the sidewalk, watching the sun glint off the mica flakes, and looking at the pale green seed pods from the maple tree, which the storm the night before had washed to the ground. I pick one up, and I open it, and with that stickiness inside it, I put it on my nose. I continue to school, and I wonder if anybody will notice that there's something strange about me. But just before I get to the schoolyard, I chicken out and I pull it off. I get into the schoolyard, I line up, I go into my class, and I proceed to have a perfectly ordinary first grade day. Except that I, the best and brightest student in the class, when I go up to show my work to my teacher, which of course I finished before anybody else, am informed with her mild expression of surprise that I have pasted the picture in upside down. I can't believe it. I think she's made a mistake, but I look in. Indeed, Dick and Jane are standing on their heads. I burst into tears. I feel totally humiliated. The feeling stays with me all afternoon. I have made a mistake. I have made a terrible mistake. I am not the perfect child, and now everybody knows it. I go home from school glumly. I go into my room. And about an hour later, my father arrives home from the university. He calls me to him, as always, and I go. But this time, when he reaches to put me on his lap, instead of settling on his scratchy herringbone knee, I stand over, I bring my little fist back as hard as I can, and I punch him as hard as I can right into his muscled thigh and run away. He laughs. I do this day after day, week after week, month after month, but nobody thinks there's anything particularly strange about it. Nobody sends me to a child psychologist. And of course, that's the only beginning of a string of strange and unexplained behaviors. As a young woman, after 20 years of bulimia, 20 years of shoveling food violently into my body and violently throwing it out again, I evolved into binging and starving. Which is to say, I overeat and then I fast 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. And I become convinced that fasting will only be successful if I also give myself what turn out to be extremely painful coffee enemas. So painful, in fact, that at first I splattered the bathroom walls and the towels and the bath mat with caffeinated feces. which I spend hours washing and scrubbing out. And then I come up with a brilliant idea. I decide that I will rub my clitoris as I insert the tube and let the warm liquid come into my body, and that will distract me. And indeed it does. Except that there's this strange voice that occurs in my head as I do this, and it says, now you will always associate pleasure with pain. I am training you, so now you will always associate pleasure with pain. Pleasure and pain will always be linked with you. The voice always comes when I do this. Then, years later, when I get involved in my first sustained intimate relationship, although we never have anal sex, I always get a burning feeling in my rectum, which stops when the relationship stops. And then there's a strange thing. When I worry about how fat I am, I never look in the mirror. I grab my ass, and if it feels the least bit soft or yielding, I decide it's time for another step class and another diet. Because like so many of my fellow Americans, I know you have to have buns of steel. Several years ago, my father died. I found this out from a kind of jokey email my brother sent out about how wonderful it was to be the child of a tennis-playing physicist and announcing the date and time and place of the funeral. The next day, my mother calls to find out when I'm coming home. I'm not coming home, I tell her. Don't be ridiculous, of course you are. And then thinking that maybe this is a question of economics, she says, just call the airlines, tell them your father died, they'll give you a special rate. Mother, I say, I'm sure you would much rather I stayed here in California than came back to New York, went to the funeral, and told the truth about Daddy. There is a deafening silence. A silence so oppressive that I feel I have to break it. I mean, after all, you don't want me to just come there and lie, do you? Why can't you come here and just lie, she says. Why can't you come here and just lie? Why not, indeed? My brother goes to the funeral and lies, professes to be so overwhelmed by grief that he cannot speak. He is rewarded by being given my mother's power of attorney, with which he proceeds to steal almost $1 million, virtually all her money, and is only outed when he progresses to trying to murder her with lethal injections and pills. Because the caregiver has figured out that if there's an autopsy, it probably won't be the esteemed professor of medicine who's on the spot. It might very well be the little Jamaican girl with no papers. So he's indicted for a few things, cops a plea, returns half the money, does 150 hours of community service. Of course, he does lose his license to practice medicine in both New York and New Jersey, but he goes on to reinvent himself as, you guessed it, a life coach. So why couldn't I go to the funeral and just lie? Why couldn't I keep my hand in the money pot and just lie? It's not because I'm a particularly moral person. I'm not. It's for my health. Because as the great French psychiatrist Alice Miller wrote, there are 3 things you can do with my kind of history. You can pass it on to your children, as my parents did, as my mother did. You can sicken of it and die, like Proust, or Schiller, or Nietzsche. Or you can remember it and talk about it. But if you talk about it, you have to remember that there are 2 important parts to it. One is what was done to you and who did it. And the other is the kind of person you became because of what was done to you. And let me tell you the kind of person I became. I became the kind of person who would be willing to put my job as President of the United States on the line for a little oral sex in the Oval Office. I became the kind of person who would bomb all those babies in Iraq to keep them from drinking my oil. I became the kind of person who knew it was a very, very dangerous world, and that those guys over there running around with their wounded penises were the most dangerous of all, and that therefore the war on terror would have to go on forever.